To all my new subscribers, hello and thank you for subscribing and finding me interesting. I'm really looking forward to getting to know all of you and all the discussions we're gonna have. I really appreciate it. Also, I got a Goodreads account recently and it has changed my life. I have become obsessed with searching books and scanning books. Oh my god, the scan function is just the most remarkable thing ever. I am having the best time scanning every single book in my house. I really wanted to make a video talking about a book that I really enjoyed that I read recently, and that is The Weight of a Human Heart and Other Stories by Ryan O'Neil. This is a short story collection that was gifted to me by a very close friend of mine for my 18th birthday. This friend has always given me really good books as birthday presents actually, so should keep her around. I finished reading it early December of last year and I absolutely fell in love with it. I absolutely adored this book. It was absolutely wonderful. I've said absolutely like 5 times in that last sentence. And I thought I'd just gush about it in a video for a few minutes. So let's see if I can form my thoughts in some kind of coherent manner. I also just generally want to read more and talk about more short story collections. It is just a beautiful form of the written word, and what it does is so unique and so wonderful to experience, and no other medium quite has the same effect on you as a short story. Also, it's just important to talk about them and discuss them and spread awareness of good short story collections, just because I don't think they're published as much, and generally from my experience they're not really regarded with the same status as novels, which is just ridiculous because short stories do their own thing and have their own unique qualities and unique value to them, and I think it's really important to appreciate that. So before I begin, I just wanted to say a few things about the author. Ryan O'Neil was born in Glasgow but has lived all over the world, in Europe, in Russia, Russia's in Europe. Actually, that's debatable. What do you guys think? Is Russia a part of Europe? This is a really great start to this video. Let's start again. Ryan O'Neil is an Australian author, but he has lived all over the world. But he's lived in Africa and Europe and Asia, all before finally settling down in Newcastle, which is a town just north of Sydney, for those of you who aren't from down under. So yeah, he seems to have lived like a marvelously fascinating life. I think that really comes through in this novel as well. There are stories set all around the world in here and it's so interesting to read about. A little bit about this book. Ryan O'Neil covers a whole host of themes in this collection. He talks about the Rwandan genocide and romance and marriage and just families and the ties and obligations that each of those things entail. He also explores the importance of language and words in storytelling. He has this fascination with language barriers and things being lost in translation and the way languages work in really unusual ways when different languages come together and people are learning different languages. This theme keeps popping up throughout his stories, and some of the time there are little riddles and puzzles for the reader to solve as part of the story. This creates a really interesting sense of dissonance in the reader as they try to decipher the riddles and solve the puzzles, and I really like that for a few reasons. I like what it says about stories and storytelling, because ultimately stories are their own language. Words are being used to translate emotions and experiences from the page to the reader. Also, it creates this added empathy in the reader as they, I guess, feel what it's like to be learning a second language, and a lot of the characters in this book don't speak the language of the country that they currently live in, which I thought was really nice. Ryan O'Neil also experiments and plays a lot with form, which creates this really interesting and dynamic reading experience. For example, there's a story in here titled Figures in a Marriage, where Ryan O'Neil uses a bunch of different graphs and diagrams instead of just prose to give an insight into a couple's marriage and how married life has turned out for them. There are Venn diagrams and pie charts and flow charts, tables, and Newton's second law of motion made an appearance. It's such a fun way to experience this story. I think that was really imaginative. There's another story called The Examination, where the reader is basically privy to a completed English exam paper that a second language student has completed. You just get these insights into that student's life and lived experiences, and that's also a really beautiful story. There's also a story called Typography, where the story is basically delivered through the perspective of a young girl typing in her slightly dingy broken down typewriter and you see that play out on a page in front of you. It's fascinating, not just for the form, but also what it enables him to do with characterization and setting. And as I mentioned earlier, Ryan O'Neil has this fascination with language and words. This is shown through a great many of his stories in this collection, but most notably, I think it comes through in a story titled A Story in Writing. He uses different writing principles and techniques and styles to tell different chunks of the story, which creates a whole host of different effects. For example, there's this one little passage where he uses a Homeric simile. I had to Google what that meant, and it's just an epic simile, I guess, in the style of like a classic epic. Like a thunderous waterfall when it plummets over the edge of the earth, rainbowing the sky with its spray while endlessly wearing away the rocks, so Frank pissed in the toilet bowl. I don't know, I found that really funny. There's also a story called 17 Rules for Writing a Short Story, where he uses quotes from famous authors about writing and about storytelling and uses those specific pieces of advice to guide the way the story is told in different parts. He's inviting the reader to constantly reflect on the way the language is informing them and changing the meaning that they make from what they're reading, which is always important to consider, I think, when you're reading. I don't know, it's always, at least for me, it's really interesting to think about the way that language works. I think that greatly increases my appreciation of a text or whatever I'm reading. So I think that's really brilliant. These stories demonstrate how much he loves language and how much he like reveres it, and also how well he knows it and how he can manipulate it to create different effects. I mean, at some points it's almost like a display of literary linguistic prowess, but it's also done in a way that's not contrived or unnecessary. It's still really readable and it always seems justified. Ryan O'Neil also has a really beautiful sense of voice in his writing. These stories are incredibly readable. I could not put them down. I was always thinking about them when I'd finished reading them. They really stay with you. He's really good at choosing his words really well. There's not a wasted word in here. It makes the characters really vivid and believable, and he establishes atmosphere and setting so quickly in what's quite a limited medium for conveying a story. So in the limited space he has for, you know, telling an entire story, he can immediately transport you to the world in which the story takes place. So yeah, those were just my thoughts on this short story collection. I would highly recommend it for anyone who likes short story collections, who's new to short story collections and doesn't know where to start. The review on the front by Wiley Cash actually says, "The best first collection of stories you're likely to read." I couldn't agree more. So I really want to pick up more of his work. I think the next book of his that I am eyeing is Their Brilliant Careers, The Fantastic Lives of 16 Extraordinary Australian Writers. That sounds really interesting. If you do end up reading this or any other works by him, please let me know what you thought. If you've already read it, please share your opinions. What was your favorite short story in here? Could you even pick? I'd also like to do a December, January reading wrap-up kind of video, so please stay tuned for that. I've been reading a few other books I'd like to share my thoughts on, and until then, I'm looking forward to seeing you all very soon. Bye. I quite like that sign off, actually. That's staying.